Welcome to Amplify, the personal brand business show. Today on the show, Bob is speaking with Gus Bhandal.
I spend all day, every day on LinkedIn. I'm very good at LinkedIn. I know exactly how LinkedIn works, more or less, as far as I can without actually being Bill Gates, who owns Microsoft, who owns LinkedIn, obviously. But I know enough about the platform to be able to talk about it freely without kind of pre-planning or without, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that applies with anything. If you really deep dive into a particular kind of area of knowledge, it's much easier to share that voice about that particular knowledge that you have.
Hi there and welcome back to the Personal Brand Business Show. My name is Bob Gentle and every week I speak with incredible people who share their secrets to building, marketing and monetizing their expertise, intentionally growing a unique personal brand and the mindset you need for your business to grow and thrive. If you're new to the show, then while you still have whatever device this is in your hand, take a second to subscribe. That way you won't miss a single episode. So this week, I am really pleased to finally be speaking to Gus Bhandal. But Gus is one of these people. I'm going to welcome you in a moment, Gus, but for the listener, Gus is one of these people. I've been to a few events in the UK, and he's one of these people where you see him across the room and you think, I need to speak to him. And I don't know why. And I'm thrilled to finally have the opportunity. We've never really spoken, but this is going to be a lot of fun because I think we have a lot in common. Gus, welcome to the show.
Bob, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to finally actually get to speak to you.
Well, and to you. I think, like I mentioned, there are people who stand out in industry for all the right reasons. And then there are wonderful people who kind of fade into the background. Those are my people. I want to lift them up a little bit. But what I love about you is the appearance of confidence in what you do. And I'm quite sure there's a lot more going on than that. And we can talk about that today. But for the listener who's meeting you for the first time, can you maybe just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are, what it is that pays your bills?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bob. So for those that are new to my world, my name is Gus Bhandal. I am a marketing strategist, a social media specialist, and I also am the UK's #1 LinkedIn trainer, according to my mum. So I essentially teach business owners how to use LinkedIn. That's ultimately how I make my money. But there's so much more to it than that in terms of helping them with marketing strategy and actually kind of deep dive into their business and finding out a lot more about them. And so teaching them that LinkedIn is the nucleus of their business, but obviously there's lots of things going on around that. So essentially that's kind of how I make my money. Oh, and I'm based in Coventry, which is, as we all know, #center of the universe.
Yes, center of the UK, which is the center of the universe. I'm sorry to all my American listeners, but it's true.
Of course.
So for the listener who's listening, I think it's probably a good idea for you to maybe take a moment. And I don't normally do this, but I think it's a good idea for you to maybe describe your personal brand, because there are people who, if you see a room full of 100 people, they kind of all blend in. You never blend in. Nobody puts Gus in the corner. Tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting how it is. I mean, it's a really long and boring story, but I'll try and keep it concise. So I've always been in marketing. Since I started my marketing degree in 1996, I've since gone on to have kind of 2 marketing qualifications, a very long kind of marketing career, and kind of in my career, latter in my career, I've been teaching people how to use marketing, and specifically segmentation, how to segment audiences, how to niche, how to find your tribe. And I used to use Terry's chocolate oranges to teach people. So for those who don't know, it's a kind of a round chocolate ball with segments, slices, pretty much like an orange, but obviously made out of chocolate. And when I started my business, I spoke to a branding specialist and we went through a number of iterations around the brand, around my values, my tone of voice, and all that kind of stuff. And the 2 colors that we ultimately settled on were black and orange. And the orange obviously harks back to the Terry's chocolate orange, but the black was very much signifying that actually it's, a lot of luxury brands use black. So it was very much like the black is to signify, I know what I'm talking about, but the orange was a warm color to say, well, actually, I'll do it nicely kind of thing. So, and hopefully that kind of comes across when I meet people, when I talk to people, etc. It's the key is the orange of the warmth. And obviously the bit that you were talking about in terms of kind of standing out, etc., I wear a lot of orange. I wear orange trainers, I wear orange bandanas, and sometimes orange turbans and things like that. So it's just that standout color that just kind of, because it's very on brand. Hopefully, when people think about chocolate orange, they think about me.
Well, I think it's a really good lesson. Mike Michalowicz wrote a book called Get Different, where he talks about how in marketing, most people trying to out-normal each other. You see this all the time. And it's ridiculous when you actually see what's happening. And what I love about what you're doing is you're not out-normaling everyone. You are distinctly, visibly different. And it clearly works because we've never really had any time together. But I knew that from a LinkedIn perspective, you were on a list that maybe has 4 people in it in the country that I would go and speak to about LinkedIn. And it's because the branding works. You got noticed. I spent time with the content. The content stands on its own. It doesn't require orange to stand. Absolutely. But it gets noticed because of the persona that you present. We're going to get into LinkedIn specifically in a minute. But I think focusing on platforms is a little bit like focusing on gravity. Gravity is there. LinkedIn is there. It's a platform. It's what we do on that platform and with that platform that really, really matters. From your perspective, one of the things that stands out, there are a lot of timid people who don't self-advocate quite the way you do. And I say self-advocate because it's very easy to point at people and saying, well, he's showing off, he's shouting. But self-advocacy for me is really important. If you're not confident enough to stand up and say, this is who I am and this is what I'm good at, why would anybody else take you seriously at it? And I'm curious to hear from you, what's that journey been like? Has that always been as easy as it appears? I'm making bunny ears for the audio listeners, because I know it appears easy, but was it actually easy?
The short answer is no, it wasn't easy at all. Having a long career and working for other people and essentially being paid a salary to, you go to work, you do a job, you come home, you get paid a salary, and you don't really think about anything beyond the kind of the 9 to 5. When I started my own business in 2017, so for all intents and purposes, I'm an introvert, and all the personality tests say I'm an introvert. I've always kind of shied into the corners and that kind of stuff. And, I've never been the loudest or the most brash, etc. But quite soon in my business journey, I understood that if I wasn't the one that was the self-advocate, nobody else would be. It's one of those things, you have to love yourself first before other people can love you. And particularly, I found my voice on LinkedIn. So I would share stuff about me and, what I'm doing and what I'm doing of a week, what makes me tick and all that kind of stuff. And people started liking it. And I started getting a community and people started engaging with me and talking to me. And I've, obviously since made friends, etc. But it wasn't easy. It's that transition from being the shy, introverted guy to actually being the one that says, hey, look at me, aren't I brilliant at something? And I think as with anything in life, if you are brilliant at something, if there's something that you're really knowledgeable about, it comes second nature. So actually, just by talking about it, and this is what I've kind of created with LinkedIn. I spend all day, every day on LinkedIn. I'm very good at LinkedIn. I know exactly how LinkedIn works, more or less, as far as I can, without actually being Bill Gates, who owns Microsoft, who owns LinkedIn, obviously. But I know enough about the platform to be able to talk about it freely without kind of pre-planning or without, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that applies with anything. If you really deep dive into a particular kind of area of knowledge, it's much easier to share that voice about that particular knowledge that you have.
So let's jump into LinkedIn then. I'm willing to bet that you could put pretty much anyone in front of you and you would already know what the mistakes they're making are on LinkedIn. That most people fail on a couple of key areas. In your experience, where do most people who are trying to be active on LinkedIn fall down? What are the most obvious, most common bear traps?
There's a lot of business owners I think one of the biggest bear traps is that people think they know what they're talking about. And I know that sounds very facetious and a little bit arrogant, but I think because social media is so abundant and because everybody uses, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, whatever it may be, it's very easy to become good at something through practice, through using it on a regular basis. So normally when I speak to business owners, many of them are like, oh, I already know how to use this, or I'm already getting clients. And I can very quickly kind of pick out a few things that kind of say, well, no, actually, this is how you should be doing it. So I guess the first bear trap is that people think they know what they're doing. And sometimes it's always good. I mean, we don't all know everything. That's obviously a foible of human nature. But I guess one of the biggest things is that people use LinkedIn to try and be something that they're not. They either try and create a persona, or they try and kind of be funny when they're not, or try and be serious when actually they're really funny, and all that kind of stuff. And it's they end up creating a persona that they think the audience want. And the problem is you only get a certain part of the audience that end up liking you, because actually that's not you in reality.
Yeah.
And I think, as humans, we're very discerning, right? We can kind of cut through the BS quite quickly. So when somebody is not themselves, when they are themselves, then all of a sudden it's kind of like, well, which is the real you now? And I think that's a thing on LinkedIn. People try to pretend like they try to be bigger than they are, or more successful than they are, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's a real, it's an issue. As I wouldn't say it's like a massive, it's not a pandemic or anything, but I think it's an issue.
And as I have you here, I personally, I've seen this LinkedIn top voice thing going on at the moment. Lots of people starting to answer silly questions being asked by AI in order to achieve some kind of top voice status. What's your perspective on that? Is it actually useful?
That's a great question. The yes and no, to be honest. And I say yes because it was useful for me at some point. So there are two kinds of top voice badges. So essentially, for the listener that doesn't know, on LinkedIn, we have collaborative articles written by AI. And what LinkedIn does is it shares this with certain people who follow certain topics and basically say, you should contribute to this collaborative article. You should kind of give your opinion. The more opinions that you give, and the more that those opinions are liked by your peers, you end up getting these little orange badges which say, top social media voice, or top personal branding voice, or, etc. Very early on, when this kind of was released, I kind of tried this. I got 3 top voice badges, 3 orange top voice badges. And I got 2 clients out of it, as in 2 on separate occasions visited my profile, and they said, we chose you over somebody else because you have these top voice badges. And I didn't have the heart to say to them, well, I only got those badges because I have way too much time on my hands, basically, because I've just commented on lots of collaborative articles. So people getting these badges is all well and good, but then people bragging about them and say, hey, look at me, LinkedIn thinks I'm a top voice. Well, actually, it's just based on nonsensical data, to be perfectly honest with you. I know one person, for example, who writes completely inane, humorous, nonsensical comments on these collaborative articles, and he gets badges when he's actually writing comments like, oh, tonight I'm having chicken for dinner, and actually it's got nothing to do with the article itself and all that kind of stuff. So there's a danger that people are playing the system. Just slightly related to that, there's another kind of top voice badge, which is the blue LinkedIn top voice badge, which the only way you can get it is that LinkedIn awards you that badge. So if LinkedIn awards you a blue top voice badge, they're the people to look for. They're the people that kind of obviously to hold in high esteem. But those that have the orange badges, I love the orange badges. I think they're great. They look good on a profile. But when you start bragging about them, I think that's a step too far, in my opinion.
That's really useful. I think also I've wondered what it takes to actually achieve them. Because I went through a phase of about 3 weeks of doing this every day and being told, yeah, it's just over the horizon. It's just over the horizon. Yeah. Never actually getting there. And it turns out it's quite a humiliating amount of work. And I'm wondering, what does it actually take to accomplish it?
Yeah, particularly in terms of the orange top voice badges, it's numerous, like over a period of time, it's numerous kind of comments on collaborative articles, but also it's based upon your peers liking those comments. So if you just comment on a million kind of collaborative articles, but nobody ever likes your comments, then I believe, now don't quote me on this, but I believe you don't get the top voice badges unless somebody kind of likes, the badges. In terms of the blue ones, we don't actually know what the criteria is. The criteria previously used to be a large number of followers and obviously having a voice in a particular sector, whatever your industry is, etc. But particularly over the last 6 to 12 months or so, I noticed that some people are getting blue badges who, quite frankly, they either have a small follower count or their content is quite generic, etc. And it just seems that over time now, I don't think there's any rhyme or reason behind them. So top voices could be anyone from Richard Branson and Elon Musk right down to Joe Bloggs, who runs at the newsagent right down the road, basically. So there's good and bad.
So people measure success on LinkedIn in very different ways. And some people measure it in terms of followers. Some people measure it in terms of post engagement or reach. What's your perspective on how to judge success on LinkedIn?
To judge success on LinkedIn, I think there's two particular metrics. The most important metric in the world is money in the bank. So quite frankly, if you're spending all day, every day on social media and particularly on LinkedIn, etc., talking about your business and talking about how wonderful you are and how knowledgeable you are, quite frankly, if you're not getting clients or making money, then there's obviously a bottleneck somewhere. But particularly using LinkedIn itself, I think the most important metric is engagement, and people actually engaging with you and talking to you, conversing with you, looking at your posts, etc. Because I think one of the dangers is that, so every LinkedIn trainer will tell you something different, and some will say you need a massive audience, and others will say you need a proper content marketing strategy. Others will say you need to post 4 times a day. Some others will say you only need to post once a month, etc. You have to do what works for you, and that's a very wishy-washy answer, bearing in mind that there's 1.1 billion people on LinkedIn. If you told everybody just do whatever you want to do, it doesn't always work. But there are certain things in terms of metrics. It's curating the right audience that want to kind of obviously listen to you, kind of read your content, and then obviously creating the content that they want to read. And once you do that, you ultimately get engagement, and when people are conversing with you, that helps your content to reach more people. And I think that's engagement is a much more important metric, in my opinion, than reach or number of followers or number of connections, etc.
And I think also everybody should be judging success on a very individual level. I think it kind of comes along to the question of, well, how does opportunity generally come into your business? In most businesses, it can either come through outbound sales activity, it can come through content and content marketing, it can come through ads, or it can come through relationships and network. These are really the only 4 routes. And what I find a lot of the time is people who are solopreneurs, they're typically depending on content and their network probably predominantly. And on that basis, it does put a disproportionate emphasis on likes, engagement, reach, and things like that. Whereas if you have a very structured outbound sales process that feels authentic and aligned with your values, and it's easy and it's straightforward to do, you don't depend on the metrics to buy you your lunch, so to speak. Certainly that's what I see is a lot of the time people will have a very strong marketing process in place, but they have virtually no sales process. And it's like if a farmer were to simply plant crops, water them, make sure the sun shone and kept the pests off, but he never took the combine harvester out of the shed. That's how most people approach sales and marketing. I guess what I'm curious to hear from you, and in fairness to you, you're a declared marketer, not a salesperson. But what are some of the nicest, most authentic approaches to becoming more proactive on LinkedIn that you've come across?
I love the combine harvester analogy there, actually. But and it's exactly that. I think that the thing with, I'm not a natural salesman. I can't sell. I basically say to people, you either want it or you don't, and that's where it stops. But LinkedIn is the only platform where you get to curate your own audience. You can't do this on any other platform. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. You're relying on people to follow you. On LinkedIn, you can do the outreach. You find the job titles, the people, the location, the seniority level, etc., etc. And you send them a connection request, and a polite connection request without a sales message and all that kind of stuff. And 9 times out of 10, they will accept, and it's perfect. What you end up doing is you curate the perfect audience, and then you create a content marketing strategy that essentially talks to that audience. In terms of, for me, in terms of sales, it's built upon creating a content marketing strategy that then engages those people. Obviously, once they engage, then the two-way conversations become much easier. Just like networking, like I do a lot of real life networking, as you know, Bob, and we go out, we talk to people, we share business cards, we learn about each other, we stand around the water cooler and talk about all and sundry, and then obviously we come back to LinkedIn and kind of obviously encourage that even further and kind of deep dive into those conversations, etc. And I think particularly a kind of a sales strategy is to curate. For my sales strategy, I should say, is I curate the perfect audience, create content that they want to read, and with those engagers, I then start conversations in terms of thanks for liking my content, thanks for liking my post, or I loved your comment, etc. And those conversations can start anywhere. And actually, I found a lot of suppliers from there as well as clients. Because actually it's building that trust. I think the most important thing in business is building trust with people, so that you obviously understand that they're the authority and good at what they do, and obviously you want them to think the same about you.
What's interesting listening to you is I was on a call with somebody this morning, and I asked, and this is a company that's turning over $1 million a year, and it's a fairly small business. And I asked, what does your ideal client look like? And they fell into quickly telling me what their average client looked like. I said, no, what does your ideal client look like? And when people come to social media, and particularly LinkedIn, they're waiting for people to follow them. It's like going to a dance and everybody stands around the wall. That's how people approach LinkedIn. What you described there of connecting with your ideal client profile, I had never actually looked at it like that before. If you have an ideal client profile, and you should, then being intentional about connecting with them, it sounds so obvious. But actually, I will challenge my listener. How many of us actually do that? Or how many of us just willy-nilly click connect? Or more realistically, never connect and wait to be invited? If you're curating your audience in the way you described, you're certainly tipping the odds of the inbound equation distinctly in your favor. I really like that. I think I think there's a lot to unpack there, but that's probably another podcast for another day.
Yeah. There's just, sorry to interrupt. It's a time factor. I think most business owners kind of rely on either inbound leads or finding the right people or making enough money and all that kind of stuff. Me personally, I'm a company of one. So there's only ever so much. There's a finite amount of time that I have. There's only a finite amount of clients that I can have. But if I had a team, etc., if I had essentially mouths to feed and mortgages to pay for other people, I would probably go much harder into that strategy of finding the right audience and then creating content that audience would want to read. It would, I would just 10x that kind of the process that I've got at the moment. But it is, for most business owners, it's a time factor. They don't really think, oh, actually, I should just connect to an extra 2 or 3 people per day. Because, if you connect to 2 people a day, by the end of the year, you're going to have another 700 connections, for example. And those 700 connections, if they all know 700 people each, then all of a sudden, I mean, I'm no Cara Vorderman, but that's a lot of people, right? So that's like, hundreds of thousands. And if you're creating the right content that they are engaging with, the point is that some of their audience are then seeing your content, which means that your content is spreading a lot further than the few people you just met for a coffee in the local networking event in the center of Coventry, for example.
So speaking of networks and in person, I think what I love about LinkedIn is it's the platform that most often bleeds into the real world. And I pay attention to what's going on around me. And you're part of what am I going to call this? The collective that's putting together the Uplift conference. Am I right?
Correct. Yes.
Tell me, thank goodness I got that right. So
Yes.
Tell me about the Uplift conference.
Absolutely. No, thank you for asking. So, a gentleman on LinkedIn, one of my good friends, a guy called John Esperian, he had this idea for a conference a few years ago. And he said, I just want to get my LinkedIn friends in a room together. He contacted me and another gentleman, Jeremy Freeman. So the three of us kind of got together and said, we should, run a conference. So we just, and because between us, we'd been to an absolute shed load of conferences, we know what works, we know what doesn't, we know what we enjoy, etc. So we thought, let's create this for other people, but specifically about LinkedIn. So Uplift Live, the conference. So we ran our first one earlier this year. The second one is next year, next March. We've got 8 speakers on stage. Obviously, it's kind of single track. It's one speaker at a time, kind of 30 minutes each. But it's the best of the best. It's basically 8 kind of like world-renowned speakers, but world-renowned on LinkedIn, if that makes sense. It's one of those things that if you don't know LinkedIn and you don't hang out on LinkedIn, you will look at these names and think, who the hell are this guy? But it's actually, we found people to talk about, to really deep dive into LinkedIn, as opposed to the kind of, change your headline or have a nice profile photo and all that kind of stuff. It's much beyond that. It's really, how are we going to help business owners and agencies and team leaders and marketers, etc., to really make the most of LinkedIn, and then go back to their teams and go back to their offices and just kind of share that LinkedIn best practice. So yeah, we ran out, like I said, we ran our first one earlier this year. We had 200 people turn up in the center of Birmingham. It was fantastic. We had incredible feedback. So yeah, we're doing it all over again next year.
Yeah, I was very annoyed to miss the last one. And I guess what we should talk about is what engaging with you actually looks like. I know you have a group thing coming up at some point soon. So maybe it's worth spending a moment just looking at, well, if people do want to work with you, what are the options?
Sure. No, I appreciate that. So when I started my business in 2017, it was very much about social media management. I wanted to manage other people's social media for them. I've kind of since changed my business model in terms of it's more about teaching people to fish kind of thing and all that kind of stuff. Because I can certainly manage your social media and I can do it for you, but that takes up all of my time. And, it's about learning your brand and your tone of voice and your, and all that kind of stuff, which I can do. But like I said, as a company of one, there's only so much I can do. So what I do now is I do training sessions. So I do one-to-one training, group training, corporate training, etc., to essentially give people the tools on how to use their LinkedIn. And particularly later this year, I'm hopefully launching in October, I'm starting a membership. So for kind of the small businesses, solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, sole traders, etc., to essentially have somebody in their pocket on the other end of the phone where they can ask questions about LinkedIn. Because I think, like we said earlier, a lot of people understand social media and in particular understand LinkedIn. There's lots of little tips, tricks, hints, advice, etc., that they're probably not getting it elsewhere. So I'm creating a LinkedIn specific membership for small businesses.
That is a really good idea. And if people want to go deeper with you, if they want to find out more about you, how can they do that?
So my favorite way is to connect on LinkedIn. That may come as a surprise to most people, but if you just look for Gus Bhandal, or indeed my hashtag, which is MGuruUK. The M stands for marketing, of course. But yeah, if you just search Google for MGuruUK, the first 10 pages are all about me. But generally, connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where I do my best work, and that's where I have my favorite conversations.
And I guess whenever I meet people that are really competent, I'm always intrigued, what do they actually struggle with? Because we're all very good at presenting our strongest face to the world, but we often learn most from other people's struggles. So in, I guess, the journey that you've had so far, what's the one thing that you keep coming up against again and again and again, and you never manage to get past it? Or it's the thing that you really struggle with right now?
I struggle with a lot of things, I've got to be honest. But I think the struggle right now is trying to find that niche in terms of, so I found my niche in terms of I help people with LinkedIn, but actually I'm still a marketing strategist. I'm still a social media specialist. And because social media is so fast moving, is one of those things that there's an element of, I want to be all things to all people, but also I want a niche on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Because if LinkedIn died tomorrow, what would I do? It's like all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't have a job and all that kind of stuff. So the dichotomy of trying to keep a foot in kind of each camp is not always easy. And on top of that, I procrastinate a lot as well. Being a company of one means that I spend a lot of time procrastinating and kind of, watching the Euros highlights and all that kind of stuff. But thankfully, over the last few years, I've got better with that because ultimately, it's clients that give me money and pay my bills and all that kind of stuff. And if I don't do their work and I upset them, then I don't get paid and my bills don't get paid.
Well, I am very grateful for your openness there. I appreciate that's probably an awkward question for a lot of people, but I think it's one of the most valuable questions because we're used to seeing entrepreneurs that are successful as superhuman, but it's not the case. It's just ordinary people doing very difficult things and chipping away at it. And over time, you cut through, and you certainly have cut through spectacularly. My last question is a question I've very rarely forgotten, but occasionally have. What's one thing you do now that you wish you'd started 5 years ago?
Wow. One thing that I do now that I wish I started 5 years ago. There's possibly, I know you said one thing, but there's possibly two things in. They're kind of slightly related. The first thing is niching. And I think, I teach other people to niche. I tell people you must find your ideal client. You must know who they are. You must know what their pain points are. You must know what the solution is that you provide. And 5 years ago, I personally didn't know that for myself. I kind of was like, I just do everything. Oh, you want Facebook help? Sure, I can make you a WordPress website. I'll write you a blog. I'll do some email marketing for you. It's all marketing. Sure, I can do it all. And the problem is that you become all things to all people, but then actually you become average at lots of things. Yeah. So 5 years ago, I did a niche, but now I'm kind of niched into LinkedIn support. So I still do the marketing strategy, but actually where you come into my business is the LinkedIn. You need LinkedIn help. If somebody comes to me and says, I need Instagram help, although I send them somewhere else. It's basically, I can do LinkedIn and a bit of Instagram and that kind of stuff. So I think 5 years ago I did niche, and that's kind of what I would, that's kind of what I do now. So that's what I would tell my younger self as, niche quicker. And the other thing is organization. I think I was never really organized. And to be honest, I don't feel like I'm 100% organized now, but actually there's a structure to my days. There never was. I just kind of like that client would come in, I'd do some work for them and kind of send them away and like everything's great. And then, so it comes back to that procrastination point that actually you have to fill your days and be very specific with the work that you want to do. So I think that's 5 years ago, I would go back and say, listen, you need to pull your finger out and be a bit more organized.
I think that's a really good answer. Gus, I have had a really good time. You have been very generous with your knowledge. I appreciate these are sometimes the things that get us paid, and sharing them, a lot of people really struggle with. So I'm very grateful for that.
No, yeah, you're absolutely welcome. I think one of the things I learned on very early on in my business is that life is about giving value. Knowledge is useless if it's not shared. And if I may indulge myself in a kind of a very short story, I used to run a pub. For a short time, I ran my local pub, and we had a chef, one of the Coventry's best chefs. People come from all over the world to eat his food, and he had a wedding, and he was going away to a wedding. He worked every day of the year for the 3 years that I ran this pub, except Christmas Day. And then he was going for a wedding, and he said, I'm going to be away for 4 days. I said, great, we're going to shut the restaurant. And he said, no, you're not. He said, you're not shutting my restaurant. It's got my name on the door. You're going to cook. And I was like, what? Anyway, he taught me to cook. So he spent a week intensely teaching me how to cook, and like fabulous recipes, and all that kind of stuff. I managed to run the kitchen. It's probably the hardest 4 days of my whole life, but I ran the kitchen. And when he came back, I made the joke that, now that you've taught me to cook and I managed in the kitchen, I could get rid of you now. I could fire you. And he said, you could, but just remember, you'll never have my hands. And the point he was making was that he said, I've got 30 odd years of cooking experience. I can teach you how to cook, and you will make meals how I teach you to cook, but you won't know what if something goes wrong? What's the temperature? What if this happens or that happens, and all that kind of stuff. And he said, I've got all that experience that you don't have. So the whole point of giving value is that I can teach you lots of little things about LinkedIn, and I can talk about LinkedIn, and I can share knowledge and advice and all that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't be able to condense my 30 years of marketing experience into 30 minutes kind of thing. So I think that's but I try to in my training, obviously, but there's, I believe giving value is really important.
Well, I am very grateful For the listener, that does bring us to the end of another episode. If you have enjoyed this interview, then you will probably love the Personal Brand Business Roadmap. It's everything you need to start, scale, or fix your expert business. Just head to amplifyme.agency. The pop-up will do the rest. Just drop in your details and it will arrive in your inbox. That does bring us to the end of another episode. Before we go, don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts, and perhaps consider sharing the show with one person, ideally one person with lots of money and a pressing need for a LinkedIn advice or consultancy.